Let's wrap up our most important Cincinnati Bengals for the future with Mike Santagata.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. This is the last in our series of most important Bengals for the future. I'm Jake Lisco. He's James Rapine. We're your normal host of the Locked On Bengals podcast, joined today by Mike Santagata to discuss his list of most important Bengals for the future. A very chalky list, and why he was so close to consensus. We'll get into his methodology and his rankings for the most important Bengals for the future in this episode. This episode of Locked On Bengals, like all of them, is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's available to you on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Shout out to all the people out there that are everydayers and make us their first listen. Appreciate all of you who have made us part of your daily routine, even in the late part of the offseason. Mike, you are our last member of the panel to discuss their ranking system and their rankings. And where we've been starting with our panel, and we did this with James and myself as well, was a discussion about the methodology you took. Everyone's had a little bit of a different flavor of how they've approached this ranking exercise and this project. So important to understand the framework before the list really has any meaning to it. So what did you take into account when you were putting together this list?
Yeah, I had to start with the philosophical question of like, what is the future, and pontificate about that for a while. And what is future? What is the most important? Because to me, the way the team's set up, like this year, technically the future. Next year, the future. And those 2 years to me matter a little bit more, just because there's less uncertainty. There's more certainty about like who's going to be here, who's not going to be here. Like, you don't know for sure, but you can see contracts. Some of this is projecting like, yeah, and Cam Taylor-Britt gets a deal, and that's why he's going to be important. He'll be here for all 4 or 5, however many years you're thinking. When you get into year 3, year 4, it's just look back 3 years to the Bengals Super Bowl team, and so many of the guys are gone. Even guys, if you would have asked in 2021, who's the most important Bengals for the future, T. Higgins would have been like number 3. And if he had a deal, he'd still be number 3, but things happen. So I ended up taking a little bit more of an approach that's looking at the present, but also keeping in mind the future, because you get guys that are on like 1-2 year deals, and you think like, what are the odds that this guy comes back? I didn't want to give anybody no chance of coming back, including T. Like, and you mentioned this when you guys talked about him, but it's not a 0% chance he's gone or here in 2025. You can get the double tag, something along those lines. So then 2 years of T. Higgins is worth quite a bit, because I think he's great. So that was the start of it. And then measuring their impact in my mind, and like also the importance of a little bit of the importance of position they play. So that's why Evan McPherson, spoiler, did not make my list. I'm sorry. I think I was the only one. I might have been the only one not to have him on. But yeah, you didn't make the list just because I thought of. Well, look, is Austin McNamara going to be up there? One of those punters, one of his long snapper. Callum Midas hasn't had an issue yet, so plenty of special teamers that could make it. But yeah, I just looked at that, and that's why it starts the way it does, and that's also why I think I end up a little bit lower on rookies, because I didn't project the highest outcome or try to like really, well, we'll get there with Myles Murphy, but a lot of guys didn't really try to plant my flag of like, yeah, and Jermaine Burton will be wide receiver 2. He will be on the field all the time, and just next year. I just kind of thought like, yeah, that's probably a second round talent they found in the 3rd round, but there's a lot of unknowns with that. And I think he's a good player. My ranking did not mean that he was a bad player or anything. I think he's a good player, but this year, fighting for wide receiver 3, could he move up to being the second wide receiver for them? Maybe, but maybe they just draft somebody next year. They love drafting wide receivers. And then he's still wide receiver 3 the whole time. And then it's dicey on like, what is the impact of that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I weighed the next 2 years really heavy. It's similar, the Geno Stones, the Sheldon Rankinses, like those guys, well, they have value, a ton of value, and they're super important, even though it's only a 2-year deal. And I think it's interesting because I think maybe not most, but a lot of people viewed it the opposite. We talked to John on our last show, and he was taking a 5-year window, which is eternity. Like, I know it's half a decade, 5 years. I mean, 5 years ago, Joe Burrow hadn't thrown an NFL pass. I mean, how much has changed since then? So a lot of things changed. So I like your approach there. How hard was it to? Not even hard, but it's similar to me, where you're prioritizing the next couple of years. At the same time, there are guys with high draft pedigree, and we'll get into your list, but Mims, Murphy, guys like that we expect to be big parts of the future, but they are unproven. It's easy to rank the proven guys, I think, and knowing how important they are. But what about the unproven guys that you're expecting a lot out of? How challenging was that to slot them in, giving your philosophy of kind of a shorter window than some of our other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, they get the boost because I know they'll be here in 3-4 years. At least I'm pretty confident they'll be here in 3-4 years. When you talk about Mims, you talk about Murphy. It would take a bit to. I mean, I guess you could just decline a 5th-year option on Murphy, and then you're at the end of that, and if he's been really bad or something. But I think I have a little bit of bias because I like both those guys a lot coming out, and they were first-round picks. So this wasn't like I liked him and he was like Burton. I like Burton. He was a 3rd-round pick. I kind of put in he was a 3rd-round pick too. Like, there's always a reason for these things. It's not like every team is stupid except us. So Mims, Murphy, 1st-round picks, and I like their film. And I think that Murphy showed some stuff last year that looks like you could project it if you were trying to say, like, oh, look at how he beat Christian Darrisaw here. And that's a really good left tackle. And he beats him clean for a sack. And he could have had 2 sacks but there's like a little bit of holding now. It wasn't called. So, but yeah, I looked at that as I am still factoring in 3 years, 4 years, and even 5 years down the line and like the long-term future, because that's also a reason that you're going to just undoubtedly have Jamar Chase like number 2, right? Because he's here, even with the contract not done yet. He's going to be here 4 years from now, 5 years from now. So it's really easy. Same with Joe Burrow, although I think his contract does run that long. So I looked at the long-term future with them to give them a little bit of a boost, but I also think they're going to have impacts, if not this year, the next year. I think Murphy will probably have a bigger impact this year, and then it'll grow more in the next season. Mims is a little bit, hard to say because I think Trent Brown will start over him, but Trent Brown misses time every year. Getting 17 games out of him would be awesome. It'd be pretty low chance of happening. So who's going to start those games? Probably Mims. So Mims is going to have an impact this year, and then he moves into being a starting offensive tackle after that. That's one of the most important positions you can play.
Sounds like your approach is pretty similar to mine, to be honest, Mike. And I also weighed the first 2 years heavier than the last 2 years. I went 4-year window. I gave a score for everyone who watched that episode. Sorry, this is a repeat of last Monday, but I gave a score for 24, 25, 26, and 27. And I weighted the 2026 score was like worth 60% of what the first 2 years was worth, and the 2027 is worth just 25%. So those last 2 years in my system combined to be worth less than one of the next 2 years in my overall scoring system that I worked out, which maybe is why, Mike, our top 6 works out to be identical, and our players included in the top 9 are all the same players. There's just a small shuffle in number 7 through 9. So, Mike, let's get into your list of guys you ranked, and then we'll start discussing some of those individuals coming up next.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your ride or die and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers.
All right, Mike, let's talk about your list. Run us through the guys you ranked and feel free to discuss any of the difficult decisions or controversial, perhaps, rankings that you put together when you were working on putting together this list.
Been a while. First two, not controversial. It's Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I assume everybody had that as their first two. It's easy. They're the immediate future and the long distance future, and they're the most important players on the team. So let's just move on. I mean, right now, they're the most important players, and they're young enough to be the most important players 4 years from now. We're good. I have Myles Murphy 3, and part of that is projection. And I know I talked about the unknown and everything else. I like Myles Murphy a lot. I think he has the chance to be a star. I don't know if he hits that, but you're talking about a first-round pick who's got all of the traits and tools to be there, missing some of the technical ability. But I thought it got a little bit better throughout the year. And then towards the end, he might have hit a tiny bit of a rookie wall, not like DJ Turner did, who we'll get to, but just like his best game came either against, I think it was against Pittsburgh, when he beat both their rookie offensive tackle Broderick Jones, and he also beat, I don't know, Dan Moore, Chuck Sikora. Like, that's not like a huge accomplishment, but I think it was Dan Moore, which Trey Hendrickson beats him every time too. But still, you're beating an NFL player, and he might start again to start the year for them. So who knows? But he also beat Christian Darrisaw. It's just when I'm looking at that, he had some good reps against Dean Dawkins, who had a good year. I think I'm projecting a little bit of like, I think this guy's gonna be good. Like, I think I think he might force his way onto the field more than we think this year. I wouldn't say it's 100% certain, but if you get, let's say, middle of the season and you've got Myles Murphy playing as many snaps as Sam Hubbard, I'm not shocked. I think he could, by the end of the season, be out there, not starting over him maybe, but playing more snaps just because he's young, hungry, and he can take it. Like, some of these older guys, they need a little bit of a break sometimes. Not Trey Hendrickson, I guess. He plays too many snaps. And Sam Hubbard kind of does that sometimes too. But Sam Hubbard is worn down a little bit towards the end of the year, the past couple of seasons. So might be better to keep him a little bit fresher. And Murphy can take that beating. He doesn't have tread on the tires going on right now. So that's why I've got him number 3. I just think that he plays a really important position. He could become the best pass rusher on the team and once Hendrickson leaves, he could take that mantle and be a double-digit sack guy. I see that as a potential for him. Could also just end up being like, I don't know, a solid run defending edge rush, kind of Sam Hubbard like. Could end up being Sam Hubbard, but Sam Hubbard's still worth quite a bit. Like, Sam Hubbard's not something to sneeze at. If this was Sam Hubbard's second season, he would be on this list easily. So that's my thoughts on Myles Murphy at number 3. I just think there is some certainty that he'll have a pretty good size role. I think he'll be the third edge rusher, defensive end, and they'll force him onto the field a little bit this year.
Yeah, I agree with a lot. I think it's interesting that you have him third because of the projection versus how you looked at things. Jake mentioned, and we're going to have you run down your entire list in a second, how similar you guys are. Then 10 happens and all hell breaks loose and you guys aren't similar at all. But with Myles Murphy, you certainly are. But go through the rest of your list and then we'll break down some of these guys. Who do you have it for?
4 is Orlando Brown. And the whole reason I have him over Amarius Mims at number 5, like back to back, whole reason is just I know Orlando Brown starts this season. So even if Mims is going to be better in 2 years, 3 years, you have to weigh in. Well, I know Orlando Brown's starting this year and he doesn't miss games. So he's probably starting all 17 games, at least possibly. Offensive line, violent physical position. You never know what happens. But I think he's a solid player, good player. I think he got injured and it affected him. I expect a better year this year than last year. So I think being a pretty good left tackle is going to be worth a lot. So he ends up being the 4th and Mims 5th. Obvious reasons, just right tackle of the future. The only reason he's not number 4 is just because he's probably not starting, at least to start the season. Cam Taylor-Britt 6. I also felt like that wasn't that hard to figure out because he feels like the most likely outside of Jamar Chase to get an extension. Now, that doesn't mean it will happen 100% sure, because I thought the same thing about plenty of guys before and they don't extend them. But he's a pretty good corner. He's a solid corner, physical, very useful, very smart player. I think he's gotten better every year. So there's still some potential there, even if some of the physical limitations. So I could see him coming at number 6. I got my list of real, so I keep looking. And then kind of the opposite, not the opposite, but similarly kind of Logan Wilson at 7 was just I know he'll be here. He's the green dot. He's the leader of the defense. It's important. He's a ball magnet. He'll probably play better this year. This past year was hopefully the worst season we get from Logan Wilson over the next 4 years, because I think he should play better than that, and I think he will. So he'll have a little bit more confidence in his ability, just playing with better players in that sandwich around him in front and behind. Hopefully that leads to some better results. And the whole reason that Pratt's not there with him is because Pratt's gone in a couple of years. So Wilson's not. They could always re-sign Pratt again, but third contracts, not really the Bengals' forte.
Not something they do terribly often. There's actually a lot of consensus here between the three of us through the top 6, where Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, everybody's got him there. There's a little bit of a difference with James on Myles Murphy, and then for Orlando Brown and Marius Mims and Cam Taylor-Britt, we're all seeing that the same way. I do find that interesting. Why don't you run through the rest of the guys you ranked, and then we'll talk about some of the other interesting bits. DJ Turner is going to be one that we're going to circle back to for sure, and perhaps some of the younger guys as well. You're also one of 2 people on our panel to give Alex Kappa consideration for the top 15, which I think is interesting, but I won't spoil more of your guys. Let's continue to run through the list.
I was the other one, Sands. Go ahead.
Yeah. Nice. At 8th is Trey Hendrickson. I mean, I'm sure everybody's talked a lot about this. Hard to figure out, but very important right now. DJ Turner, number 9. We'll get there. Number 10, T. Higgins. I feel like it's also interesting. We'll get there. But we talked a little bit about it. It's not that he's 100% gone after this year. Geno Stone, Jordan Battle, which Geno Stone was hard for me because I feel like they could sign him again. Like, he's young. He's on a 2-year deal. Like, I don't think it's a certainty he's gone after this deal. And then Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa. To me, that almost put them back-to-back, just like 2-year deals, solid players, very useful. Not sure where to put that, though. And then Jermaine Burton and Chris Jenkins right after. I feel like those are opposites. Where like Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa, like, I know these guys are solid. I know they're here for 2 years. There's a chance they could be here for longer. And Jermaine Burton, Chris Jenkins is like, I don't know. they could be stars. Who knows? And they should be higher. But at the same time, 2nd round pick, 3rd round pick for this year, it's hard. It's hard to figure out, because when it comes to 1st round picks, I know with certainty that they're going to at least give that guy a really good shot. Get the 3rd round picks, going to earn it. So yeah, that's the list the whole way down through 15. And then there's guys I thought of after that, thinking of like Mike Hilton, even though he's older, but like another guy I think of, non-zero chance. He ends up playing longer than we think for the Bengals. And Dax Hill, very difficult. I ended up being one of the few to not rank him, just because we'll talk about DJ Turner. I think DJ Turner is the guy for that job.
Well, let's talk about it. DJ Turner, 9th on your list. Why do you have him 9th? Why do you think he's that important? And obviously you have him well ahead of Dax, who he's competing with for that starting job.
Yeah. Part of it is I'm not that confident Dax will be a outside corner. Like, part of me thinks that his actual role this year is going to be the backup nickel, and they're just giving him a chance to go win a job, because you're not going to win that job over Mike Hilton. So, hey, we still want you to, you were a 1st round pick. We still like you. Let's try to get you to win a job. And your best shot at winning a job is over DJ Turner, because he's the weak link out of everybody in the secondary. He's the only one that's not like an established vet, good player. To me, DJ Turner, when I watch him, I think he's got the prototypical movement skills. He lacks some length. He lacks some size. Hill's not super long or, physical, big Cam Taylor-Britt style corner. So they're a little bit similar there. And when it comes to who's played where, like, Turner's played a ton of snaps outside, and that's what they need right now. And Dax Hill in college, when you hear him, he played corner, he played nickel, he played inside. And when he played for the Bengals, he played one game outside and got kind of toasted. I felt bad for him. Like, why was he out there? And he's trying to cover Amari Cooper as a rookie who's never played outside corner in that Browns game where everybody went down and the Halloween massacre. So I'm kind of planting the flag of, like, I just think DJ Turner wins his job. It's a very important position. And he was a 2nd round pick. I think he still could be a good player. I'm not writing him off after 1 year, where I thought he showed games this year where he was good. And then there were games he was bad. And there's games where everything looks bad, but he's in the right position. He's just, ball's just out of reach. And I think that's okay for right now. He's got to learn how to play a little bit longer, how to play to the maximum of his length, and he could be a good corner. So it's really just deciding which one you're rolling with. To me, like, do you think DJ Turner is going to be your outside corner, or do you think Dax Hill's going to be the outside corner? To me, I think it'll be DJ Turner. I think it's interesting, but I also think that anytime a first round pick's getting moved positions in his third season, it's not a good sign.
Yeah. We'll continue with the list and specifics on why Sands ranked who where. We will continue with that coming up next.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by BetterHelp, and BetterHelp knows, as an online provider of therapy, that comparison is a thief of joy. It's really easy to envy other people's lives, especially with the unrealistic images we see and snippets we see on social media. It might look like they have it all together on Instagram, but in reality, they have complex up and down lives, just like every single one of us. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. They can help you with positive coping skills, with boundary setting, if that's something that you struggle with. Therapy can empower you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma and things like that. So if you're thinking of trying therapy, you can give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, fit to your schedule. You can fill out a brief questionnaire right now to get started, and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist who is suited to your therapy needs. And if it's not working out, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today. You'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
All right, Mike, let's continue to roll with your list here. And you mentioned T. Higgins, and I had T. Higgins 7th. You had him 10th. Obviously, it is a challenge ranking him, but why did you have him as high as you did? Because let me make sure, but I think you were second highest on T. You were. I had him 7th, the 10th, and then no one. Joe had him 15th, but that's it. Jake had him 16th. So it was pretty low on a lot of lists. Obviously, we know about his future being in question. Why'd you have him 10?
Yeah, well, this year is probably the best team they'll have over the next at least 2-3 seasons if T. Higgins leaves after this year. So this year, very important, and it's got the least amount of uncertainty. I think T. Higgins is a great player. I think awesome. Like, I think probably when he leaves, and if he goes somewhere that's a decent situation, I'm not talking about going somewhere where his quarterback can't throw the ball or something, Atlanta over the past couple of seasons. But if he goes somewhere where it's a decent situation, I think he could end up being a really good player. I think you could end up talking about like, oh man, T. Higgins, like if only they could have kept him too. And I know it's just not feasible for the Bengals to do it long-term, at least in their mind. So he's not going to be here in 4 years, but there's a lot of uncertainty in 4 years. So to me, I think a guy that's going to be here and give you really high-level football this year and possibly next season. That's the tough part, because it's not a high chance, but it's not – I don't think it's below like a 10%. Like, I feel like it's an okay chance that if he balls out this year, like you could write plenty of stories that how T. Higgins gets the double tag. One, wide receiver market keeps exploding. So if you can get him and it ends up looking like an okay deal, that is what it is. Two, say Ja'Marr Chase just hopefully doesn't, but goes down for another extended period of time. And T. Higgins has been awesome when Ja'Marr Chase has been down. Like T. Higgins on pace for like a 1,500-yard season anytime that he's the number one guy. If that happens again, and they just go like, look, okay, let's keep him around one more year as Ja'Marr Chase rehabs or something like that. Like there's plenty of seeds, and hopefully it's a more happy story of like, yeah, they're both awesome, 1,600-yard receivers or something with 12 touchdowns each. Let's just keep them around. Like this is a steal to keep him at $26 million or something compared to Tyreek Hill just got $50 million a year. I don't know. Well, maybe Ja'Marr Chase did actually. There's plenty of ways that it could end up happening. Most likely is that he leaves after the season, but the season's still important. The season is one of the most important seasons that they'll have over the next couple of seasons, because you're kind of going through a mini retooling and trying to get some of these young players up to speed. Like they're going to have as much firepower right now as they probably will over the next 4 years. So to me, this is the best shot at a Lombardi. If any of these players is one of the top 3 reasons you win a Lombardi, you would look back and go like, yeah, he was very important, even if he left after 1 year. Think you have like Von Miller for the Rams. Like if I was ranking that now with it in my mind back then, I'd be like, yeah, Von Miller was really important. He won a Super Bowl for this team. So, or Aaron Donald, if you're trying to do that, it's like, yeah, he retires after next season, but it was Aaron Donald. He won the Super Bowl and he's been awesome. Now, I'm not saying T. Higgins is those guys. That's why he's at 10th and not at like 5th. So that's where I am on T. He was really hard to rank. He was probably the hardest person for me to come up with a ranking.
It's hard because of that word future. And when you think about the word future in the NFL, you can't really go past 2 years, which is why I had in my system the pretty significant reduction of importance, but I still counted them because it's like a tiebreaker kind of thing. I ended up with huge clusters of players too, where it was really, really tight for me between like 7 and 20. The difference is much smaller between those guys than it is at the top, where there's some very clear, these guys have easily projectable roles, are already very important to the team, and are under contract for all these years. And there's no real reason to drop them in the ranking system. But one other takeaway for me when I did this exercise was the future core for the Bengals is kind of hard to identify. Like the next wave of extension candidates, I'm not really sure where those players are right now. Like obviously there's Jamar Chase. We've talked about Evan McPherson as an extension candidate this year. Cam Taylor-Britt, I think, will be one as well. But beyond those guys, who we all have ranked pretty highly, besides McPherson because he's a specialist, it's kind of difficult in my eyes to say, like, here's guys that are going to be the future core. Here are guys that are going to get the next wave of 4-year extensions. What were your thoughts or other takeaways like that? Did you have any like roster texture takeaways or team building takeaways when you were doing this process?
Yeah, I think that came up when I was thinking of like Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa, and Geno Stone, of like, they don't have a ton of guys that you're like, well, they won't have money for those guys because I know these guys are getting paid. It's kind of one of those things like, well, I actually don't know that many people are getting paid, so why is T. Higgins not getting paid? But it's too late. It's too late is the real issue. Like it had to have been done last year or the year before. Now it's like, now it's all new money. That's hard to put together. But that comes up. It's like, that's why Cam Taylor-Britt's 6, Logan Wilson 7. It's like the top 7 are the guys that I feel pretty confident will be here in 4 years. Mm-hmm. After that, it's like, well, yeah, maybe Trey Hendrickson doesn't get extended, but he's important. DJ Turner, if he's good, he gets extended. If he's not, he's probably off the team in 3 years. And T. Higgins, another one. It's like, I think of that. That was really difficult for me of like, are the guys that will get these extensions? And it's just going to play out. I think that's the biggest part of this. This is the perfect year to do this and have a lot of differences. Because if you did this a few years ago, you might be thinking like, yes, T. Higgins will get an extension, Logan Wilson will get an extension, and all those other guys. Now it's I don't know who gets extensions. So, well, I mean,
and like Jesse Bates would have been.
Yep, Jesse Bates would have been on
going into the period in which the Bengals and Jesse Bates were negotiating. We all thought, yeah, of course they're going to extend Jesse Bates. He's a really good player. And then really quickly it became evident that wasn't such a sure thing. James, do you have any other sweeping takeaways from this as we reflect on it? We kind of wrap things up here a little bit. This is the last episode, of course, in the series, and last chance to reflect on this.
Yeah, I think the way the roster is set up is part of why I had the short-term 2-year window. Like this roster more than a lot of rosters, because there's so many 2-year contracts or guys that are now happen to have 2 years left. Heck, even Jamar technically has 2 years left. And obviously things could change in a hurry. And hopefully they can lock him up long-term. But Cam Taylor-Britt, same thing. Like, what if he's an all-pro this year and he's like the Jesse Bates, where it's like, oh. Now, the Bengals historically value corner more. So you would hope that they'd be able to get something done with Cam Taylor-Britt if he becomes a star. But it's just, it is interesting because I think we all agree that it's one of the higher-end rosters in the NFL. But the key is some of these guys, regardless of where we had them ranked, the Andre Yosevach's, Charlie Jones, whether they were ranked or not. And a lot of us, at least me and Mike, didn't have them in our top 20. But Chase Brown, Chris Jenkins, Jermaine Burke, you need some of these guys to hit. Obviously, Mims and Murphy lead the pack there. But all these other guys, some of these guys need to hit starting this year so they show up on all of our lists next year. Because if they do, then it'll be much easier to see that those extension candidates that you mentioned, Jake. Because you're right. Right now, it's probably like player F in free agency a few years from now that we'll be talking about next March and then the March after that.
Yeah, and like where do future draft picks slot into this is something that people asked on Twitter, like, oh yeah, well, I'll put 2025 first round draft pick at number 7, or not knowing who that is, just knowing that draft picks in the first round are important. And that was part of my process too. That was something that I thought was really interesting. I think only I did this, where I said, in the case of Myles Murphy, like if he doesn't hit, that's important too. Like I took the other side of it, where when you've invested highly in a player and it doesn't work out, that's important in a negative way and has a major impact on the team in a negative way. I don't think anyone else kind of brought that up, but that was part of the process for me and why Myles Murphy ranked, it's part of the reason that Myles Murphy was number 3 on my list. Different reasoning from you, Mike, in terms of why he ended up there, but just a player where there's a lot of leverage. And if it goes well, then the high end, like in terms of like baseball leverage, like if he hits, that's a really good thing. And if he misses, that's a really bad thing. That's what I mean by it. Like high leverage situation, his outcome has a big impact on this team's ability to be a good pass rushing team for the next 5 years, because Trey Hendrickson is not going to be necessarily part of that long-term future as much as he's part of the short-term future. So there were some very interesting approaches. Everybody's got their own episode where we broke down our list. We broke down the public list. We broke down consensus. We've talked about takeaways. I thought it was a really interesting 6-part process talking about what is important to the Bengals future. What can we define as a Bengals future? What is really even predictable? And what can or should we be thinking about when we're thinking about the future? You can find Mike on Twitter at Bengals_Sans. He's also on the Always Game Day in Cincinnati podcast. Mike, appreciate the time. And that's going to wrap up this series, everybody. Thanks for hanging out and keeping up as we've gone through it. And until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.